All right, CNN senior military analyst Admiral James Stavridis joins us now to talk about these developments. He is a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and a partner of the Carlyle Group, an international investment firm. Admiral, always good to see you. So talk about these signals that a stepped-up U.S. transfer of weapons, defensive and perhaps even offensive now, will send to Moscow, especially given how the president has long hesitated to do such a thing.
Well, let's hope it's a wake-up call for Vladimir Putin. I'm not sure it will be, at least initially, and I think that a package of weapons is going to be necessary, but it's not going to be sufficient ultimately to get Putin to the table. But let's start with the idea of defensive weapons. Excellent. You're showing the Patriot, highly capable. The more of those we can get to defend the Ukrainians, the better. What I think needs to happen is step two would be start flowing offensive weapons. And these could include everything from more F-16 fighters. These are superb offensive systems. Harpoon cruise missiles go after the Black Sea Fleet. You could send more of the Army HIMARS. These are 200-mile surface-to-surface missiles. You could provide more offensive cyber capability, for example. So step one, defensive weapons. I'm pretty sure we'll hear that momentarily. Step two, let's get some offensive weapons flowing in the game. And by the way, the idea of having the United States Defense Industrial Base become the producers of these weapons under a paid-to-them pass-through NATO is a pretty good idea and gets NATO into the game. It helps the U.S. industrial base. It helps President Trump with his base in arguing for further aid for Ukraine. So bottom line, step one, defensive weapons. I'm really going to listen hard at this press conference and hope for step two, which would be additional offensive weapons. That's going to be necessary.
So defensive weapons, offensive weapons, you mentioned also offensive cyber capabilities as well against Russia. That's step one and step two. And then step three, which is this sort of sanctions bill that's, being looked at by both sides of the aisle in terms of Congress. This idea of slapping 500% tariffs on countries that purchase Russian oil and gas. I mean, the combination of those three things. Admiral, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off because President Trump is speaking now with the NATO Secretary General. Let's listen in. Admiral, let me bring you in because one of the questions that a reporter asked that I thought was quite interesting is when a reporter posed the question to Donald Trump, listen, if Vladimir Putin sends more bombs to Ukraine within this 50-day window, what is going to be your response to that? How are you going to escalate? And the president essentially said, don't ask me a question like that. Don't ask me a question like that. I mean, do you think he should have had, or there should be some kind of plan for that eventuality? Because based on what we've seen so far, that is likely to happen.
Yeah, I think there probably is a plan. I certainly hope so. Before the press conference, you and I were talking about step one, defensive weapons, step two, offensive weapons. I didn't hear that clearly articulated, although it was certainly implied. I think the question you just asked is incredibly germane, which is, okay, what's step three and what's step four? I think step three is you go ahead and slam in the sanctions that you were just talking about with our reporter. And whether that's 100% or 500%, or it's at some point in 30 days or 50 days, doesn't really matter. It's the intent of secondary sanctions. That's what's really important here. And then I think step four is you take the $300 billion in Russian assets that are parked in Western banks, mostly in Brussels, and you distribute that to the Ukrainians. And here's step five, and this is controversial, but you go ahead and start putting Western boots on the ground in Ukraine as trainers, training missions, get them into or close to the combat zone. I hope we don't get there, but I think you start with defensive weapons, then offensive weapons, then sanctions, and then you move to 300 billion distribution, and you hit the Sunday punch if you have to, which is bringing NATO boots on the ground. God help us if we get there, but that's the logical flow of reaction.
All right, Kevin Liptak and Admiral James Stavridis.